So welcome to another SAFPAC seminar. I'm delighted we've got Helen here, Helen Douglas. Helen's going to talk about to change our thinking, philosophical practice for difficult times. And I don't think anyone's going to disagree that we're in increasingly difficult times. I was just briefly talking to Helen before we started, and I really first came across Helen in 2003 or 4, I can't remember now, but I was dealing with difficult times then. I was just having moved this program from one institution to another university. I was having to move it from that university to another university. And during that time, I got invited to Seattle. So a guy called George Coombs was particularly into Levinas. And I, through the European Journal, which was then, as this course was called, Psychotherapy and Counselling as a Means to Health, because we started off very much in the National Health Service. I did a special issue of the European Journal, and I was looking for published respondents, and somebody called Steve Gans. And Steve Gans, somebody very important to me. He was part of the Philadelphia Association, which I joined, and he, with John Heaton, made me far more interested in philosophy than psychoanalysis, which I'm still interested in. And he suggested Helen Douglas, who wrote a wonderful response to those papers. And we've since moved to another institution, which I'm glad to say we've only been there for 5 years. So we've got another 10 years, hopefully, before we have to move out of that one. So really, I'm just admitting some other people. Helen's going to explore with us. I think we've seen her videos, hopefully, and read her paper. This topic of changing our thinking, philosophical practice for difficult times. So Helen's, as you'll know from her story, amongst many things, is a philosophical counsellor. Welcome, Helen, and over to you, please.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to read this paper. I wrote it in 2015, which feels like a lifetime ago in all the things that happened since then. And I would put a few things differently now, but it still kind of covers the basics of my philosophical counseling practice, where it comes from, how it goes, where it gets to, and it covers a lot of ideas. So I'm just going to read it, because if I talk, then I go all over the place, and then we'll have a good conversation, I hope. So here I am reading To Change Our Thinking, Philosophical Practice for Difficult Times. The abstract: if a time of crisis calls for a new mode of thinking, philosophical practice offers the means to answer that call. Contemporary philosophical practice revitalizes the ancient Greek understanding of philosophy as a way of life that cultivates personal transformation and new ways of seeing the world. This article describes the development of the author's philosophical counseling practice as a practice of emancipation, in concert with the writings of Emmanuel Levinas and Jacques Rancière. It considers the significance of personal engagement and companionship for the cultivation of practical wisdom, and suggests that the intransigence of our global social and economic crises ultimately indicates an incorrect view of human nature and an ossified or unbalanced relationship between practical and theoretical ways of knowing and wisdom. And we begin with an epigraph from Karl Marx. The self-confidence of the human being, freedom, has first of all to be aroused again in the hearts of these people. So, first section is duty. David Harvey, distinguished professor of anthropology and geography, concluded a 2010 talk on the crises of capitalism with these words: "We have a duty, it seems to me, those of us who are academics and seriously involved in the world, to actually change our mode of thinking." It's not just economics. Our social, political, spiritual, and environmental milieu are riddled with crises, and all the information and technology in the world fails to bring us to balance and sanity. Any real solution will have to come about through a different mode of thinking. To say that we have a duty suggests that such a change is both imperative and possible. So why is this a duty for academics? Academics are society's designated thinkers. If the crisis calls for a different mode of thinking, then who should or could answer but academics? Except if the crisis calls for a different mode of thinking, then the current mode of thinking is itself implicated and current thinkers as well. It is not clear whether academics are obliged to step up and address the crisis or to take a time out and think about what they have done, or both, or neither. It seems to me that Harvey opens another possibility with his, it seems to me. It seems, feels, appears like this to me, to I, David. Only a person can be seriously involved. Only a person can feel called to duty and answer the call. The Marxist professor studies the crises of capitalism to understand and explain it, but I, David, finds himself responsible in the world. The conscience animates and informs the professional role, brings the professor to life. The research he does provides the means and resources to give effect to the personal commitment. In the fitness of this, we sense integrity and authenticity in the man and the work. Closing the lecture, he speaks candidly to fellow thinkers of a duty to change our mode of thinking. The crisis in the world calls for a transformation in us, in our thinking, in how we relate to the world. Harvey's we is an invocation that it may produce and bring forth others. As I respond, I, Helen, identify myself. Here I am, involved and rebound. I single myself out to take part in this we. And for my part, I would note we are not only academics. Skeptikos. What is to be done to actually change our mode of thinking? The immediate conundrum is, of course, how to think about effecting such a change by means of the mode of thinking that we are called upon to transform. If our way of thinking is part of the problem we are trying to resolve, then any plan that strikes us as logical or reasonable will only dig us deeper into the hole. We do not yet know what we are trying to do. If we think we do, we are likely wrong. At the same time, we are not giving up on reason and knowledge. With the criteria for judgment, and even what would count as evidence themselves in question, we become skeptics by default. I do not mean those dogmatic doubters who somehow know that nothing can be known, but seekers in the classic manner of Pyrrho and Sextus Empiricus. In Unamuno's words, him who investigates or researches, as opposed to him who asserts and thinks that he has found. We would very much like to know, but then, in an immediate situated experience of undecidability, we find that we cannot. Our judgment suspends itself. In this suspense, we search, expectant, uncertain, and vigilant. The best we can do is to start out from where we find ourselves, taking up with whatever is both ready to hand and resonant with the sense of duty whose call we answer. In this preliminary exploration, what can guide us? Some outside influence, necessarily, but one that is not coercive, not undue. There are two guiding clues already on the scene. One is the weirdness of the sense of duty we feel, of finding ourselves obliged beyond any contract we signed on for. This is unreasonable to our current thinking, but neither can we completely dismiss it or rationalize it away, nor do we want to. We may be mistaken about what we should do, but that we are called to respond feels necessary and true. Not true like a fact, but self-evident as gravity, or true as the flight of an arrow. It keeps us grounded and on course. The second clue is this first-person plural we, I, and I, and I, singular persons, whose commonality is just this sense of responsibility, who have given their word and will stand by it, this community that exists otherwise than our usual categorical or blood premises of identity. To change how I think, I need access to other minds. The others also depend on me. In our shared difference, we talk together, wrangle with each other, think things through. Keeping company, we keep each other honest. ABCs. Every social or political project is built on some idea of human nature, of what we are and what we are here for. Given that people are ABC, it is reasonable that, it makes sense that, and we should do XYZ. Put differently, everything we call a fact already expresses some theory, and every theory has its own practical and moral order, from which inevitably proceed certain courses of action and their consequences. When socio-political projects yield increasingly unreasonable, destructive, or depraved unintended consequences, it is precisely their hidden intention, the foundational premise of the human, the generative ABC, that must be revealed and questioned. For example, the Protestant Western capitalist projects of liberalism and neoliberalism express an idea of human being that, for all its dedication to reason and freedom, has also sustained and justified monstrous histories of domination and devastation. Where it is given that human beings are both sinful and elect in the eyes of God, and where it is given that we are self-centered and self-interested profit-seeking antagonists in a war of all against all, there it appears that such evil is inevitable to the endless regret of all right-thinking men. Attempts to mitigate or resist wicked consequences are never good enough. They often make things worse. I do not know what David Harvey was thinking in 2010, but it seems to me that this is what a duty to actually change our mode of thinking signifies. Our global crisis leads all the way down to the root question of philosophy, what it means to be a person, a subject, a self, what it means to be true. And that if we could understand humanness differently and be directed by that understanding, there might be a solution. Claire Shirky, in an article on thinking the unthinkable, tells us there is one possible answer to if the old model is broken, what will work in its place? The answer is nothing will work, but everything might. Now is the time for lots.
Jessica, would you switch your mic off, please? Sorry. Thank you.
Are we good?
Yep.
Nothing will work, everything might. Now is the time for experiments, lots and lots of experiments. We each take up the task in our own way by means of our own concerns, experience, and possibilities, in the positions we happen to hold and the roles in which we have been cast. Profusion is our friend. What follows draws from the workings of one small experiment in the field of philosophical practice. Philosophical practice is the contemporary revival of philosophy as a means to personal transformation. In his Philosophy as a Way of Life, Spiritual Exercises from Socrates to Foucault, Pierre Hadot calls this the original aspect of Western philosophy, not as a theoretical construct, but as a method for training people to live and look at the world in a new way. Acknowledging that readers may be put off by the phrase spiritual exercise, Hadot insists that no other adjective covers all the aspects of reality we want to describe. The spiritual exercises of early Latin Christianity, such as Ignatius of Loyola's spiritual exercises, were themselves a development of earlier Greek askesis, from the verb askein, to exercise. So, says Hadot, in the final analysis, it is to antiquity that we must return in order to explain the origin and significance of this idea of spiritual exercises, which is still alive in contemporary consciousness. The Greek skeptic, Stoic, and Epicurean schools of philosophy all recognized that unnecessary suffering is caused by dogmatic belief and unwarranted fear and desire. Each school offered specific remedial exercises that included reading and contemplation, investigation, attentiveness, self-mastery, truth-seeking, indifference to indifferent things, and a keen awareness of mortality. Dialogue, friendship, and community were essential to their practices of learning to live, learning to dialogue, learning to read, and learning to die. Over the centuries, Western philosophy largely abandoned or was relieved of this transformative therapeutic tradition. Hadot dates it back to the Middle Ages, when spiritual exercises were relegated to Christian ethics and mysticism, and philosophy was called upon to supply conceptual and theoretical support for Christian theology. In the modern age, he continues, philosophy regained its autonomy. When philosophy regained its autonomy, it still retained its purely theoretical character, which even evolved in the direction of a more and more thorough systematization. Not until Nietzsche, Bergson, and existentialism does philosophy consciously return to being a concrete attitude, a way of life, and of seeing the world. 20th century psychoanalysts and psychotherapists made use of existentialism and phenomenology for therapeutic purposes, but it was not until the 1980s that philosophers began to develop non-dogmatic, non-systematic practices to help individuals to live and look at the world in a new way. Gerd Achenbach opened the first philosophical counseling practice near Cologne, Germany in 1981. Similar initiatives rapidly appeared across Europe, in North and South America, the Middle East, and Asia. The Southern African Philosopher Consultants Association was formed around 2000. In 2014, I attended the 13th International Conference of Philosophical Practice, which was held in Belgrade with more than 100 participants presenting papers, workshops, and masterclasses. The most recent international conference was this year, the 17th, and it was held in Romania. Different forms of philosophical practice have proliferated, with the best known being philosophical counseling and consulting, philosophy cafes, and philosophy for children. Philosophers develop practices along the lines of their own interests and experience. Some work in specific areas, perhaps with business or professional organizations, or with specific populations, such as medical patients, athletes, or prisoners, or align themselves with a particular thinker or philosophical school. There is little standardization across this blossoming frontier, although national characteristics are recognizable, and there are continuing efforts to establish the profession more formally. Training is available in some countries, but a graduate degree in philosophy is generally accepted as a basic requirement. However, there is a common sensibility that this work is essentially philosophical, and that it brings a neglected source of philosophy back to life. This is sometimes expressed in words ascribed to Epicurus. Empty is the argument of the philosopher by which no human disease is healed. For just as there is no benefit in medicine if it doesn't drive out bodily diseases, so there is no benefit in philosophy if it does not drive out diseases of the soul. Philosophical counseling for individuals presents itself as an alternative to the standard medical model of psychotherapy, with its framework of pathology, diagnosis, and treatment. In Achenbach's words, the philosopher takes his visitor, which is what we would call a client or patient, seriously. He isn't understood by theories, i.e. schematically, but as the unique human being he is. He isn't judged by any measure of health. The question rather is whether he lives according to himself. In Nietzsche's famous phrase, whether he becomes what he is. Thomas Gutknecht, linking personal disorientation with social conditions, argues that the vital necessity for philosophical practice derives from a severe disorientation in contemporary life that shows itself in the decrease of awareness of oneself as a subject, the loss of intellectual and spiritual energy, the renunciation of autonomy in the face of the sciences, fundamentalism, nihilism, and relativism. All right, emancipatory practice. I opened my philosophical counseling practice in Cape Town in 2002, billing it as engaged conversation and a meaningful alternative to psychotherapy. I had first come to philosophy with questions that arose from my experience in the anti-apartheid struggle in South Africa. My graduate research considered just war through the phenomenological philosophy of Emmanuel Levinas. It was later published as Love and Arms, Violence and Justification after Levinas. For Levinas, to be human is to be implicated in an intrigue of ethics and being that is resolved in an infinite responsibility for and before others, a responsibility that is prior to consciousness and indeed gives rise to it. One finds oneself caught up in being and enjoyment, like Descartes' conatus or Heidegger's Dasein, a being that is concerned with its own being. But this solitary jouissance or malaise is disrupted by contact with the radical alterity of another person, what Levinas calls the face of the other. The revelation of one's responsibility before the other occurs in a kind of proto-dialogue, a pre-linguistic expressiveness upon which all other discourse depends. The face of the other says, "Thou shalt not kill," and at once reveals all humanity, all the other others. The subject responds, "Hineni, me voici, here I am." Within my own liveliness and freedom, within my own liveliness and freedom, I am caught up with and for others. With and for others, peace and justice is my business. For Levinas, ethics is first philosophy. I recognized that this philosophy could ground an ethical, non-coercive therapeutic practice. Indeed, many psychologists were taking up Levinas at the same time. I developed my own practice with the support of Andrew Feldmar, a veteran psychotherapist and colleague of the radical Scottish psychiatrist R.D. Laing, as well as an international online community of postmodern therapists hosted by Lois Shaver, a psychologist and Wittgenstein scholar in the US. 5 years on, in an article called Levinas in Practice, Face to Face and Side by Side, I described the double nature of the work as both face-to-face in proximity with the other and side-by-side, engaged together with the other in the work of dialogue. These roles or phases are interdependent. Each in turn gives rise to and interrupts the other. The counselor or therapist primarily bears responsibility for maintaining the relationship face-to-face, while the guest, patient or client, leads the work side-by-side. I reframed this therapeutic work as a practice of emancipation after discovering Jacques Ranciere's The Ignorant Schoolmaster, 5 Lessons in Intellectual Emancipation. Ranciere tells the story of Joseph Jacotot, a French polymath and Republican at the time of the French Revolution, who developed a method for what he called universal education. From his own teaching experience, he realized that explanations are not necessary for understanding, and that teachers do not have to know in order to teach, hence the ignorant schoolmaster. In Jacotot's and Ranciere's view, an education conducted by a learned master guiding an unlearned student along a curricular path teaches nothing but stultification and inequality. All people, Jacotot believed, have an equal capacity for intelligence. Just as every child learns its mother tongue, we learn for ourselves what we want to through exercising our will and discipline. And so, this is me in an article, once equality of intelligence is posited, the work of education is no longer instruction. One only instructs inferiors, but emancipation, which means that every common person might conceive of his human dignity, take the measure of his intellectual capacity, and decide how to use it. Accordingly, in classrooms that would emancipate rather than stultify, students apply their will in order to learn for themselves, and the task of the emancipated master is to reveal to them their innate intellectual power. How? By asking questions or assigning exercises to verify that the students have learned something. I incorporated this approach into my counseling practice in a threefold logic of ground, path, and fruition. While the ground and path of the work remain a Levinasian good practice of relationship and dialogue, its fruition is now seen as emancipation. understood broadly as the fact or process of being set free from restrictions, rather than therapy understood narrowly as treatment to relieve a disorder. The recognition of emancipation as the objective of the practice sharpened it in several ways, first and again as a critical alternative to psychotherapy. Someone who seeks counsel is confounded by both the situation and her inability to extricate herself from it. With a good therapist, an old master who treats her with well-founded diagnoses and symptom-alleviating medication, she might well find some relief. But if she isn't encouraged to find her own way to her own desire and its meaning, she will also pick up a distorted sense of dependency and a reinforced experience of her own inadequacy. Alternatively, if Francière and Jacotot are right, then we don't need to be treated in order to live well. In an emancipatory counseling practice, we can pay attention to what happens if we stop assuming that some people are mentally or morally unstable, sad, bad, mad, or stupid, and look instead for evidence to validate equality. Second, it expands philosophical practice into the realm of politics. Philosophical practice does not disengage us from the world. On the contrary, it knocks down the false walls between the personal, the psychological, and the political aspects of our engagement. Just as we suffer from the arbitrariness of our own minds, we are caught up in the phantasmic beliefs, fears, and desires of our society. Even more than Hadot admits, these philosophical, spiritual exercises take in all the aspects of reality we want to describe. This is why some form of consciousness raising is a necessary supplement to political activism and analysis. As the song says, none but ourselves can free our minds. Third, an emancipatory philosophical practice restores to philosophy the enigmatic figure of Socrates as the ignorant master, the know-nothing gadfly and perspicacious interlocutor, someone who speaks in plain words about things that matter to real people in their particular lives, helping to clarify the significance of their desires and fears. In other words, it discloses a dearth of living wisdom in academic philosophy. Do philosophy masters and students today practice self-examination in order to live lives worth living? Does the academy flourish in the pleasures of companionship and collaboration? Are texts read and written as a contemplative practice, slowly, deeply, looking cautiously before and aft, with reservations, with doors left open, with delicate eyes and fingers, as nature recommends? In my experience, it's a mixed bag. Catch as catch can. But given also the crises in higher education, I do not know of any institution that would be able to take these questions seriously. Socrates is dead, cries the lunatic in the faculty lounge, and we have killed him again. Self-expression. The people who come to me are self-selected individuals from various demographic origins. Most have previous experience of psychotherapy or psychiatry. They think that something called philosophical counseling might be useful, but they do not much care about theory. They want to make the real discovery that will, as Wittgenstein put it, enable them to stop doing philosophy or therapy when they want to. For them, philosophy begins as a gnawing and unsettling problem. Sometimes the question is clear, a particular choice to be made or a transition to be navigated. Sometimes it is an opaque sense of distress, affliction, or constraint, as if it were a question of being in question themselves. They are beside themselves. They do not know how to go on. Someone in this condition comes to me and takes up the intimate, intricate work of self-expression through description, reflection, and discernment. His business is to find his way. Mine is to provide refuge and a fellow traveler's experience of the road. I listen and respond in a kind of open-ended dialogue, asking what he means, why he thinks so, presenting other possibilities as they occur to me. Having no interest in dogmatic or diagnostic interrogation, in good Peronian Levinasian style, I believe what the person says, but I do not
Pauline,
meaning.
je peux te rappeler parce que je suis en conférence. Je te rappelle après.
Beatrice, could you switch your microphone off, please?
I believe what the person says, but I do not ascertain its meaning. We consider his habitual habits of thought and behavior, what they signify, what he could do differently, and what impedes him. We discover what pains and pleases him, his commitments and weaknesses and dreams. We trace the contours of what is unthinkable or unspeakable. We are trying to make sense. Our progress is guided by usefulness, not in a doctrinaire utilitarian sense, but to move in the direction of more life, more reality, more freedom. He takes the practice into his world, then comes back to tell me about it. Over time, our conversation brings him sufficient clarity and confidence to move on, and so he does. It is always moving to sit with people in their pain, confusion, fear, and shame, and to witness at the same time their courage, humor, intelligence, and grace. Like Miranda at the end of The Tempest, I think, oh wonder, how many goodly creatures are there here. This is a fundamentally philosophical scene, a person, a world, a question, an interlocutor. The careful practices of expression and self-awareness, attention to the suffering caused by unwarranted beliefs, fears, and desires. It is not doctrinal. Rather than teaching about virtue, it encourages virtue to develop. Because it takes time, it calls for patience and discipline. Because it is formidable, it calls for gentleness and courage. Because it faces the truth, it is valiant and fierce. We learn how to learn. Practical wisdom emerges as a trustworthy sense of orientation, not from principles and rules, but from the self-confidence of the human being that Marx called freedom. It is not the certainty of achieving the truth so much as the sureness of being true to oneself, true to life, and therefore dependable. The real discovery or the experience of emancipation is rarely once and for all. It requires time and luck, and we do not always get there. The will or the imagination may be weak. Sometimes we miss our connection. We can succumb to the pull of other logics, to the imperatives of self-interest, fear, and hatred, or the convivial narcosis of the commonplace. Sometimes it is just not time yet. It is not surprising that freedom is hard won, but that it prevails at all suggests it is always possible, always at hand. There is no good reason to suppose that some of us have an inherent capacity for intelligence, goodness, and sanity, while others do not. But neither can anyone be emancipated against their will. Once we accept the possibility of this basic equality, perhaps all we can do is to create conditions that cultivate the will, the wit, and the desire for freedom so that people can make their own way. If so, that would be a reasonable thing to do. To come back to David Harvey's suggestion that another mode of thinking will help us to a solution, picture the source of Western philosophy as a single well from which flowed two streams. The one on the right pursued the course of science, with questions about the nature of physical reality and how it all works. The one on the left followed the course of human wisdom, with questions of living well in the world with others and what it all means. The philosophers of the right-hand stream studied the water carefully, compared it with other things, formulated and tested theories, devised technologies and complex systems. At the stream on the left, philosophers and their students immersed themselves in the water, learning together to swim, to drink, and to drown. Eventually, all the productive action was happening on the right-hand stream, in terms of objective, abstract, and applied reason. The stream on the left dried up or disappeared, leaving behind only some tracts that people still scratch their heads over. On the right, the place of philosophers was gradually usurped by scientists, technologists, and engineers. In 2010, the physicist Stephen Hawking declared philosophy dead. Philosophy, he said, has not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics. Scientists have become the bearers of the torch of discovery in our quest for knowledge. But as early as 1964, the philosopher Martin Heidegger already divined the end of philosophy in the rise of cybernetics, cheerfully recognizing this as the triumph of the manipulable arrangement of a scientific technological world and of the social order proper to this world. The end of philosophy means the beginning of the world civilization based upon Western European thinking. Well, as David Harvey says of our current global order, that's not a world I want to live in. And if you want to live in it, be my guest. This is where Harvey continues. I don't see us debating and discussing this. I don't have the solutions. I think I know where the nature of the problem is. And unless we're prepared to have a very broad-based discussion that gets away from the normal kind of pabulum you get in the political campaign, it's crap. You should know it's crap and say it is. And we have a duty, it seems to me, those of us who are academics and seriously involved in the world, to actually change our mode of thinking. Etymologically, to discuss means to shake apart and to dash to pieces. Marx, in a letter calling for the ruthless criticism of everything, recommends an equally thorough course, the reform of consciousness, not through dogmas, but by analyzing the mystical consciousness that is unintelligible to itself, for the self-clarification to be gained by the present time of its struggles and desires. Mystical consciousness can be understood as the hidden source of intention and action, whether as the inchoate sense of self from which we experience the world, or as the irreplaceable I that presents itself in response to a call from elsewhere. Anthony Steinbach calls this the vocational self, uniquely who I am with others in the moral universe. Reform of consciousness is synonymous with change our mode of thinking. In Marx's view, it consists only in making the world aware of its own consciousness, in awakening it out of its dream about itself, in explaining to it the meaning of its own actions. It is a transformational philosophical practice. You do it with people on the spot. To change our mode of thinking takes some daring or desperation. To allow everything to come into question, to shake everything apart and subject everything to ruthless criticism entails a vertiginous leap of faith into epistemic freefall. One faces all the disorientation, terror, and awe of awakening. This is why it helps to have good companions and a guide or midwife. And yet, in proper conditions, we land on our feet. Figuring out the proper conditions is also always part of the practice. The self-clarification of our struggles and desires tends toward a way of life that is fundamentally relational, reasonable, and workable. To practice with our particular questions in our particular circumstances cultivates a sense of orientation and discernment and a self-confidence that lets us find our way in the world, in contact and involved. We judge our course by where and what it brings us. When we fall in a hole, we stop digging. To say this in Greek, phronesis, practical wisdom, or maybe the wisdom of practice, is the necessary ground for the craft lore of techne and the justified knowledge of episteme. We do not just see with our eyes or understand with our brains, we need vision and wisdom. To bring anything to light, we first feel our way in the dark. It is risky. How alert one must be, how open, fearless, receptive, and responsive. A person comes to self-awareness as phronimos, someone who is sensible, ethical, and sane, and as Parisiastes, someone who knows pabulum from politics, someone who can and will tell the truth. Wisdom and love. It occurs to me that I left something out in my story of the two streams at the beginning of philosophy. It must have been that the first philosophers moved easily between the streams of wisdom and science, or maybe it was one stream with two banks. At any rate, in the beginning, goodness and nature were not separate. They are still not separate. When we act as if they are, we are acting under delusion. And this delusion of separation may be the source of all our craziness and corruption. And when we restore the proper relation, that is when we do get things right. Not once and for all, but in that situation. It's a practice. We become familiar with it. We acquire a taste for it. To practice like this reestablishes philosophy as the once and future queen of all sciences. Philosophical practice is not a fashionable contemporary offshoot of the academic discipline of philosophy, but a return to its pre-disciplinary root, to the preparatory thinking that is required for thought. It also leads out into the task of thinking that remains at the end of philosophy, in a suddenly open, unexpected, and unpredictable future. These practices disclose our interrelatedness and interdependence, restore our confidence and integrity, and render us more useful. They guide us to live well with each other in the world, as we should. They disclose to us that knowing and loving are interrelated and interdependent, and that another mode of thinking is already possible, already present.
Thank you very much, Helen. Thank you. So I think we open it up to a conversation now. Yeah. So is that right, Helen? You sort of invite comments, questions. Yeah.
Yes, please. I just want to change my settings so that I'm seeing things properly.
Sure.
Now what have I done? Okay, that's good.
Hi, Helen. Thank you very much. I just wanted to very quickly say that when Stephen Hawking says that philosophy now is dead and science has the answers, he is doing philosophy.
Indeed.
Yeah, not that science has anything to say about death in the first place.
Mm. Yep, sure enough. But I mean, it's to say he's doing philosophy. Yeah, I mean, he contradicts himself, but that's it.
Helen, I thought your talk was really beautiful. I read the paper in advance. I just could listen to it every couple of weeks. Probably it was a good mantra to set me in a good place with my practice, which I'm only just starting out on really now. I've been training for a few years, and at the moment I work mainly with charities, seeing people in low cost services. But what I've started doing recently is trying to build my private practice. And what I'm really concerned about is just seems to be around me quite a lot in some of the groups that I'm mixing with is, I'm a part of a couple of referral networks. There's these giant WhatsApp groups, basically, of 200 people plus. And well, the idea is exactly as it is. People share referrals through it. And the whole thing, one of my friends who invited me onto it, he said, if you figured out what you want to specialize in yet, he said, you must specialize in something in order to get clients from this group. And so I'm all of a fluster because, your idea of the ignorant master, it seems to be that you're saying that working with the knowing capabilities of a client, cultivating their awareness is kind of what is a primary part of your practice. I don't know what you think about specialisms, or if there's like a type of person that you specialize in, or it sounds like it sounds like you don't have a favored person. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention it because it was something that shocked me, this idea of specializing in something. I don't think I could ever come around to saying, yeah, I'm good with ADHD, but not so good with grief. I'm good with people with sleep issues, but not so good, with, what so on. So anyway, I'll shut up there. I'll just maybe see what you think about
that. Two ways I can respond. One is to your particular situation, and the other is what I think about specialization. For your situation, it's kind of the difficulty of advertising, of being recognizable in the marketplace, kind of thing. And I've really struggled with it because I'm a counseling philosopher, and people who like the word counseling don't particularly like the word philosophy, and vice versa. People who like the word philosophy don't want to do anything like emotions, heaven forbid. Yeah, I think it's a real thing, but I think and I can hear from how you're saying it, you kind of have a sense of what you want to do and how you want to be, and figuring out how to express that on your group in place of having a specialization is probably what you're looking for. In terms of specialization, this piece was written kind of as a provocation, and it's a little snarky and polemic. Sort of, I'm done with academic audiences and academic writing, and but at the same time, I'm very aware that whatever can be said about the psychological, whatever universe, there is a lot of good work being done. People are being helped. And the research that kind of fits in with my sense of things is that what really makes a difference is the relationship, the therapeutic relationship between the counselor and the counselee, and what the person brings with them, like how determined they are, how whatever the resources they bring in, the relationship that's maintained, and like very little is the orientation. So I think you could be a really crappy philosophical counselor, and you could be really manipulative and dogmatic and horrible. So it's not the specialization, or it's not the orientation, although people might have an affinity for certain kinds of people that they want to work with. There's that. But it's not the specialization, it's not the theory, it's not the technique, whatever, that makes the difference as much as the relationship and what the other person brings to it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you, but it's just interesting to watch on this WhatsApp group, when someone refers somebody, 25-year-old male client struggling with ADHD, as I saw one this morning, and then you just get a mob of people saying, oh yeah, I'm good with ADHD, I've got a good understanding of that. They don't seem like ignorant masters to me, It's so I've got good prior knowledge about what that person is about, I think, from just those 6 or 7 words in the referral. So I think what you were saying is a really important polemic, actually, to come around, and maybe I'll share it in the groups.
If you're, do that would be cool, and I want to know what happens when you do.
I'll probably get kicked out of it.
Start your own.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Or it may be, I mean, if there's people looking for therapists on the thing, if you say, I have no idea what to do with a person until I meet them, and anybody who would like not to be treated like a specialization, you're welcome to contact me. It might be a relief.
Bold. Yeah, maybe I need to wait till I'm a bit more fed up, like you said. Yeah.
Can I sort of follow that a bit, if I can? So I really enjoyed your paper. There's lots of really interesting things in it. But one of the things I find myself thinking about is the business about being what you say, an ignorant master, which I think is just interesting. But the ignorant master bit, which fits, I think, very much with skepticism, skeptikos. But I'm not sure how that sits with the idea that someone might have an incorrect view of human nature. So there's something about the skeptical part of the paper and the business about. I mean, there's a bit about Marx about explaining to people I can't remember where it is. It's 129 somewhere at the bottom. There's something about explaining to people the meaning of their own actions. I guess I'm thinking that that doesn't seem to sort of sit so well with skepticism. In that, then you know about human nature and you know what people's actions mean.
Yeah, fair enough. Well spotted. It could be that knowing is quite situational, and it passes, it comes and goes, it arises and fades away and takes different forms. So it's not an essentialistic kind of knowing. Would be one thing. And you can know when something's wrong without particularly knowing what's right. And it's also, it's not a logical, it's a belly thing. There's something wrong here. And this feels better, and this feels better, and this feels better. Yes. And what does it mean? And how do we talk about that? The conversation in the relationship, that we're finding our way together, and I'm not leading anything, I'm not diagnosing or curing anything. That's the distinction that I want to make. Yes.
Yes, I can see that there's something about, you can have a sense that something's wrong, or I guess it fits very well with skepticism that you can, the sort of the dominant view you might have all sorts of reservations about without knowing that it's correct or incorrect.
Yeah, and I've just come across the phrase in epistemology of caring, which I think is really rich, because all of these feelings, these senses that don't get a lot of attention, have a lot of really good information in them. And it comes to the point, I mean, if you work as a therapist, the moment when somebody just gets a light in their eye and they go, oh, well, what if I did this? And you go like, yes, that's the thing. I can see it in your eye, in your face, in the lightness that just happened in your body. That's the thing you should do. So that's a kind of knowing, but it's relational, and it comes from the body and the heart differently.
I find myself wondering about how Marxism enters your practice, or probably never leaves your practice. Yeah? I really find it really interesting, and I can wonder about myself, connections with Levinas. Yeah, and I just think of what little I know about South Africa, and what's happened to the ANC, perhaps, and all kinds of different things that happened. Yeah? I'm just curious with regard to people you see from all kinds of different backgrounds, as to, if you're looking, I suppose, with Levinas and Marx, and you're looking at responsibility, and you're looking at what it might mean to put the other first, then I could see sort of how Marxism might alter a more obvious Levinasian approach. I just lots of thousands of questions and things, and wondering about too much.
As I was reading it, I realized that I knew what I was talking about when I wrote that section. A lot more than I could understand what I was talking about now. I read it with some bravado. But essentially, I come from a politically active history. That was my road to here. And I mean, the Marxist notion that like economics and economic relations are fundamental to how we live in the world.
Yes.
It's a pretty big insight that needs to be. So
how can a capitalist put the other first?
Yeah, exactly. You just said, well, if there's some profit in it, or if there's some attachment, or if there's something to be gained down the road. folks, some of the folks I work with here, decolonization is a very big deal. Politics matters, and it's also so the deceitful part of psychology under capitalist conditions is the sort of privatization of suffering. It's your problem. The individualization of it, and also hiving it off from any kind of social or political or whatever elements. And it's nonsense. It just is. She
Well,
said
there's an
that.
argument that what we're all doing is furthering, we're just putting sticking plaster on system that we stop change rather than help it. So there'd be an argument that what you're doing, what I'm doing, is philosophical practice to keep difficult times coming. Precisely because what you're saying, it ends up with individualism. It ends up with our clients perhaps doing better than the people around them. And there's the whole question of our responsibility for our clients' responsibility, all those kind of things, but which most psychology doesn't, almost by definition, look at, and psychotherapy doesn't really look at either.
I imagine it happens, but it's not sort of the directiveness of the discipline of the profession. It kind of, I would imagine, leaves it up to the individual practitioner to be ethical. And
yes, what do we mean by ethical? You see, again, it comes back to that, and whether Levinas is sufficient in being ethical, on various different grounds. I mean, I find it very helpful, but one can still be very critical, I think.
And it gets codified and legalized and
Yes.
I just wondered, in a sense that one of the issues, I think, putting what Dale was just saying, is the idea that that you say on page 128, we're trying to make sense, and in a sense, for me, that's contradictory of Levinas. In a sense, and that's why Marxism is contradictory to Levinas, because it's about imposing a view on the world, his worldview. And, in a sense, my understanding of Levinas is more centered around the idea of non-intentional intentionality. And making sense is more about the intentional. And, how can you ever see the non-intentional if you stay focused on the intentional? The non-intentional being that kind of, I like the image that Levinas writes about the tear in the eye of the other. That, you suddenly might have that opportunity, a glimpse of another person, not in a moment of understanding, but in a moment of emotion. And if you try to understand, which is, in many ways, the problem, you only ever understand the other, your view of the other. You never meet the other, because the other is beyond the understanding. And it was a question here, or a statement.
Sorry, your the sound wasn't terrific, so I'm not sure that I followed all of that. The notion of understanding the other, Andrew Feldmar, my teacher, says, I don't need to understand in order to love. And the intention to understand is a colonizing gesture. So if that's what you're saying, what bit of your question did I not just answer?
I'm not sure it was a question. Sorry to impose that kind of thinking on, but it was just that I suppose exploring Levinas and trying to think of it in terms of psychotherapy was a no-go for me, because in a sense the therapist often sitting beside, trying to understand. For me, that's nothing to do with the Levinas. In a sense, Levinas, the meeting of the other is only possible beyond that understanding. And so, in a sense, if you're trying to understand in terms of Marxism any other political kind of theory, then in a sense the other is always missed. It's your conception of who the other is.
Yeah.
And that's why I think psychotherapy has always been a problem. Psychotherapy in more recent years has been a problem for me, because we as therapists all spend our time trying to understand, and you never meet the other as a consequence.
Sure. Yeah. The thing, maybe this will make a difference, is all of the theory I do is for me to be in this seat properly. For me to be able to hold my seat is the way I think of it. For me to have a whole kind of web of things that I can bring forward to the other person when they says, I don't know why this is going on in my life. And I can bring this, I can bring this, I can bring this. But Levinas is the basis of it, because I'm just entirely here for this person. It's about them. It's about what they're bringing. It's about responsiveness, responsible responsiveness. It's responding. The root of respond, you may know etymologically, it's like spondare. It's like pledging a troth. It's being true to this relationship. So the Levinas is all on my side. If the person I'm speaking to doesn't need to know anything about that, really, unless they're interested, it often doesn't come up at all, really. So it's basically it's a self-application of how I am in relationship with the other. It's my business. Peace is my business. I'm responsible for their responsibility, Levinas says.
I
think humanity comes very, very much from the paper. Sorry, Anil. I think that side of it comes through very well, and appreciated reading it.
No, I guess I think the discussion is really, really important and interesting, and the things that you said, Dennis, and how you responded, Helen, really that really makes me think too, and it reminds me of something that I think I saw on page 126 when I was thinking about the difference. There's something said about this philosophy grounds an ethical, non-coercive therapeutic practice. And I was thinking about the difference between someone like Levinas being important to how we try to think about things, or try to understand or not understand, or be with, or whatever. But on the other hand, to ground it. And to ground, I'm not sure about how we ground it in Levinas, ground the practice. I mean, I'm not sure generally how we ground anything, any therapeutic practice in a theory, in a theoretical.
Aren't we potentially grounded in an ideological ensnarement? Yeah, and Marx can help us perhaps see that without necessarily becoming a Marxist.
Oh, to help us see how we have run aground is different. I think from,
we're ensnared. Yes.
Yes, how we're ensnared, how we've run aground. But yes, to ground a practice in a theory, that's a different thing, I think.
I don't think it's a theory. I think it's a way of life. I had an experience, and Levinas is the only one who's given me language for it. And when I'm talking about a fundamental ABC that gives rise to some XYZs, Levinas is my ABC. My confidence in the basic goodness and the equality of persons, what it signifies to be a person, and the notion of a subject as a singularity without identity. All of that makes really good sense to me. The sense that it's language for the sense that I have. The language and the sense go together. So it's not the idea of it. It's not up in my brain or something. It gives me confidence. It's where I work from. And I can imagine a religious person having that kind of faith in God, maybe? No, this feels much more material than that. I can't make anybody a Lebanasian, whatever that even means. But I can just tell you that that's how it is for me. And you may find that interesting and intriguing or just far-fetched.
No, I mean, I just I mean, probably maybe I'm on my own and it's fine, but I guess I'm thinking that there's a difference between finding something useful or increasing your confidence or feeling greater conviction. And on the other hand, this idea that you can ground a practice, whether or not it's a theory or it's a set of writings, I think that is I think those two things are different.
Maybe the metaphor of ground is dividing us here.
I think that's it. That, I mean, the metaphor of ground and it to me, it probably gets something closer. I mean, you mentioned religious people, it gets something closer to something more sort of fundamentalist to me. But maybe that's just me.
Yes.
I wanted to ask if you felt by doing that you lose anything.
By doing what, I lose what?
By sort of grounding yourself within Levinas, do you feel that you lose anything at all?
Like what?
Like yourself, I suppose.
Infinity, because it'd be a totalizing move.
No. It's funny. Okay, so like, I'm wondering, I mean, this conversation, this discourse, whatever it is between us, dude, I'm wondering what's going on right now. Like, I get to say this is my experience, and you might find that like, we don't need to agree, clearly. But does anybody have a sense of like knowing what's going on here? Because I'm a little.
I think I know. Might half know what's going on for me, and I think it's. I mean, what I've been peddling, is that these things, have got implications for practice. And if we're grounded in anything, we're grounded in practice. It's a cultural practice with all its issues of that and other cultures and that sort of stuff. It's a cultural practice. People come along and, different people are helpful. Levinas, I find particularly helpful, but it's rather different sort of saying that, Levinas has helped answer a question for you that nobody else could, you said, You said earlier, something along those lines. Fine, no problem with it. But I think it's when you ground your practice in Levinasian stuff, then it sounds almost fascistic, It's a totalizing move.
That's only if I'm recommending that you should too, and I'm not.
No, but we're trying to save you, save your soul. It's it's just that can we? I think what I'm getting from Onel, for example, is can we really ever is it appropriate for us to ground ourselves in any one theory?
That's a theorizing question. I'm saying I do. It works for me. And you can say, that's interesting.
Well, it's a question of whether where one gets that. So from a Levinasian point of view, there's both acceptance rather than judgment, yeah, there in some ways. But there's also the issue of what might we be say in order to put what we think, with all its dangers, of putting you first. Yeah. Yeah. Now it might be that by putting you first, we feel we ought to say to you, we question whether how healthy is it for you and other people to ground yourself in any one theory.
Okay, and that's maybe a fundamental misunderstanding of Levinas. If you think it's intentional that you can put somebody first, you are completely missing the point, as I read Levinas.
Intentional, sorry. Yeah, that one would have, could have the intention. Yes, right. You think? Please say more about that.
Sure. There's to say more. Let me say this without a great deal of skill. There's a lot of ways of getting Levinas wrong. The radical, the inversion of being and ethics goes all the way down. It's absolutely profound. And if you don't get that and try and live with that and call yourself a Levinasian, you're still in being and you haven't got it. And that's why these questions arise. Something along those lines. Forgive my lack of skill.
I think it's maybe linked to what Dennis was saying, possibly about the non-intentional.
Yeah, I think if I may say, Adele, it is that. I mean, in a sense, I'm not sure the grounding is a useful way of describing how Levinas's ideas.
Okay, let's get rid of the notion of ground. I think that ethics is prior to being. I think that I am for the other before I am myself. Levinas says this.
Yes, he gives a primacy to the ethics over the ontological. Yeah, he gives a primacy of ethics over being, because being ends up with my being. Yeah, if not careful. And so he's saying, no, we need to put the others being first in some way. But in putting the others being first, then there's the issue, is that become intentional? It's what I think you're very importantly raising for me.
You keep using this phrase, putting the other first. That's a verb. You're not doing this. No one does this. It's already in place. You can vary it, I suppose. No, that's not even it. That's not right. That the notion of I am caught up in my being. I don't like pain and I like pleasure and I have ambitions and I have plans and I can be brought to a standstill by someone suffering. And I have to respond to that. And that interrupts me in my being. And then, oh, sorry, I haven't done this for a long time. That you guys need to read my book, because I go through a really close reading of this section of Otherwise Than Being, just really step by step by step. Or
thank you very much. Sorry, Helen, asking you, but I'm really unclear about this, and I can see how I could be getting this wrong in having an intention of putting the other first, you see.
There's intention gets interrupted, and in the interruption I go, oh dear, I've been getting it wrong. And then I get back into my life, and then I get interrupted again. But or even, okay, let's put it this way. In the face-to-face, peace is first of all my business, but peace calls for justice, and justice calls for institutions, and institutions take on a being of their own, and they're something along the lines of the bureaucrat can never see the secret tears of the other. Right. So The institution is necessary for justice. All of this stuff in being is necessary for justice. And then it has to get interrupted by these hidden tears and called back into order. And that's what we do as people, is we call the political back to ethical order. And that back to that primacy is what I'm talking about grounding, but it's a priority, it's another order, it's yeah.
You see, I think for me, the struggle that you're having, Helen, is the struggle that everyone has with this idea that Levinas is writing about, because as soon as you speak it, you put it in language, you've already lost the kind of engagement with the non-intention of the other. The conversation of course. Inevitably imposes an intentional take on it, and you've lost the tear.
Sure. There's the saying and the said. I think that's exactly where we're at. Yeah.
Yes. I always think of, sorry, go on.
Just my way of thinking of the saying and the said is, and when I say that I believe everything that anybody tells me, what I am absolutely sure of is someone is here saying something to me, and I need to pay attention. But what they're saying and what they mean by it and all of this, that, and the other thing, that we need to sort out together.
And the thing about the making sense of that you raised first initially, Dennis, is my sense is that you're making sense of together, sort of caught up in something with the client.
Yeah, and they're the authority of whether.
Yeah, and they're the authority. That's the sense that I got. That whatever it is that you're grounded in, it seems you'd mentioned something that you went through in your life. You didn't mention what it was, but it sounds like that this stuff around what Levinas has to say for you, you sort of innately align with it, right? In a way. It sounds like it allows for the other to be ultimately placed first as the authority in that, right?
Thank you. Yes, that's it.
That's the sense I get.
Thank you.
And so it's not about intentionality, because sometimes, Dale, you talk about that, and I know what you're saying, because the risk is if you forcefully putting the other first, you might be denying something about how you're in the practice as a therapist. So what's your agenda, right? But the way you talk, Helen, is that's why you mentioned something about religion. There's a religiosity, and not in a negative way, I don't think, but we do end up believing in and aligning with things that we read about more, certain things more so over other things. I've been reading a lot of Heidegger this year, and I can't help but I'm a bit of a zealot around it, because it just, on a core level, it all makes sense to me, and hopefully in it, like you, Helen, I think that, from the stuff I've read of Heidegger this year, it seems to be allowing for the other to be the authority. You can celebrate the otherness.
It's not even allowing, it's recognizing their own authority in their own lives.
Right. Yeah.
Isn't that where some of this difference lies, though? That's, I think, for some of us, we're uncomfortable with the idea of a ground in the same way as we might be uncomfortable with the idea that the other is any authority either. And neither of us are an authority here, if we're skeptical.
Can we just eject from the conversation? My experience of coming to this, this was never any ambition in my life. I'm quite surprised to have found myself here, and that in retrospect, it kind of looks like a straight line. But for me, it was like going into a big closet and just looking for the thing that I needed and not knowing what I was, and Levinas. Oh, it's this, in a way that nobody else did.
See, can I just sort of say something? I think that whatever is going on with me is because I'm really interested in the things that you've written, and I mean, certainly in philosophy, in the stuff about skepticism. So I'm really, and I think that what happens to me is that if I'm really bored, I shut up and go to sleep and just let it be. But if I'm interested, I want to sort of say lots of things. So maybe I might come across as if I'm I'm being a bit too a bit too much, but it's because I'm interested. And I think that one of the things that this is about for me is that there is a tension between something which is to do with skepticism, and on the other hand, Levinas, whether or not you have ground. There's to me it's hard to be a skeptic and also bring in somebody who is the sort of central sort of person in a way, rather than sort of be engaged more in something critical about him or her. That's my thing anyway.
Yeah. The skepticism I'm talking about, the skepticism by default, is just, I don't know. I'm not intentional in my skepticism. I just don't know. I'm clueless. I'm an idiot. Really, I am. And I'm turning it into something to work from. But also, I can't be skeptical about love. I'm not going to be skeptical about love. I will not be skeptical about love. And Levinas at some point says, I use the word responsible because love is just too squishy to talk about. I'm paraphrasing. But I think if we're not on the side of what Derrida talks about, being on the side of life and surviving, I'm all for that. Living, loving, living. That I think we have to make a commitment to without any kind of fallback. I think it has to be an act of faith, epistemic free fall. That I'm sure about. And I don't know what I mean by
it. Maybe I'll shut up in a while, but maybe I'm taking skepticism too sort of seriously, and that's because I think of the stuff about Iranian skepticism.
Yeah,
I think of them as a group of people who they wouldn't have any difficulties with love. I think they have difficulties with theories and models, and any sort of theory or model they want to sort of say, well, there's much to be said for it and much to be said against it, as I think you know. And so the idea that we can have Pyrrhonian skepticism and then somebody that is sort of immune from that skepticism is partly what I'm up to.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And I'm of the various versions of skepticism, I prefer Pyrrho, but my God, he's no. 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 That's all.
Can I ask a question, Helen?
Please.
So I was just wondering, because with Levinas, the self and the other is very fundamental. But I'm wondering if, let's say, the 20th century wild sciences like quantum physics and contemporary art and contemporary music, don't they really change our fundamental thinking about self and other? Don't they on some level suggest that that is a mistaken binary?
If you're asking that question, it must be that way for you. So tell me what change it's made for you.
Well, relativity for one thing.
Okay.
The other is relative to me, is not a separate entity like Newton would like to think. The difference between matter and energy is not as fundamental. It's a matter of degree, of acceleration. So if I travel fast enough, I become you.
No, you don't.
Well, but we can catch up at some point. I mean, what I'm trying to say is that it feels that these fundamental categories, self and other, male and female, they're kind of much more up for grabs than perhaps they were when Levinas was trying to make sense, of the aftermath of the Second World War.
Yeah. I think that's probably right, which means I kind of agree with you. Don't know whether it's right or not, but I kind of augment the notion of the self with a more Taoist or Buddhist-y emptiness, that it's always in motion, it's always in changing. I find that really helpful. And one of the things that occurs to me is someone I'm working with, and an experience I've had, that when someone has gone through and survived a death of the ego, a death of the self, that kind of rupture, disaster, end of the world, at some point down the line, they think, I'm still here. And then who am I if I'm not that person? And that's a really nice place to bring in thinking around emptiness or quantum or whatever. That the notion of a solid essential self is, yeah, I don't think it's got a lot of life left in it.
Thank you.
I think I think that's I like that response, but also there is something to like your question, Daniel. In a way, it's a bit like a Stephen Hawking's question, though, isn't it? It's a bit like the idea that the things that come from science are somehow more, I mean, it might be the things that come from science are somehow more likely to be sort of to tell us more, to be closer to the truth, to all that kind of stuff. So anyway, I wonder to what extent it is like it's like what you say about the right, what you say, Helen, about the stream on the right and the stream on the left. This is something that comes from the scientific stream. So supposedly it's sort of it's well supported, and we ought to take it very seriously. But maybe it's possible to sort of not take it very seriously.
I think it matters that we're reasonable and we're intelligent and we can measure things and compare them, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we can't just give that all the power in the world.
Well, Helen, thank you very much. We've come to time. I thank you so much for sharing those beautifully written and spoke. Your videos and your writing is just it's just I'm just I haven't got the words you've got to say how able I think you are, and for sharing this, something that you found that works for you. I think as a result, we've some of us may become a bit more skeptical about skepticism, but also I think I was impressed what you wrote about. You wrote a paragraph about Greek concepts, and it seems to me that the one thing that particularly, this is it's one way of looking at, I think, European culture is it's Athens and Jerusalem, and Athens has so much I think the basis of our work in different ways for people here, but there's something about Jerusalem, Levinas, where that privileges that different to the Greeks, perhaps heteronomy over autonomy, and it seems that element for me is something that's so vital if we're not to just be caught up in individualism, etc. But Helen, thank you very much, and it's wonderful that Cape Town's on the same timeline almost as here, and I'm very, very pleased you're able to be with us today. Can we all thank Helen? Switch on your mics.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for your engagement, for the opportunity, for your time. If anybody wants more conversation, you can contact me. I really enjoyed this, and yeah, thank you.